Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well still, and welcome to today's bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they really do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter. The experience I am going to share happened when I was 12 years old, so it was the year 2000. I live in central Sweden. My parents had been divorced for a couple years. The day of my encounter, myself and my younger sister were visiting our dad at his farm, where he was raising slaughter pigs for one of the country's largest meat producers. I've always loved animals, and I loved helping out at the farm, feeding the animals, cuddling with the piglets. My dad had built a pig housing just a couple years prior. I'll quickly explain the layout of the building. When you enter through the main entrance, you find yourself at the beginning of a long corridor with 4 doors on the right side, 2 on the left, and 1 door at the end of the corridor leading to the back side of the building. The first door on the right led to an office and staff room. The second door to a storage room. The following 2 doors on the right and the last door on the left led to the 3 what we called pig stables, called Stable 1, 2, and 3, each 48 separate pens where the pigs were housed. The first door on the left went to the barn where we stored the food and straw for the animals. The way the farm worked was that we received pregnant sows a week or 2 before they were expected to give birth, and when the piglets were old enough, the sows were sent to other farms to rest for a few months before they got impregnated again. The piglets stayed with us until they were old enough to be sent to slaughter. The day of my encounter, it was a real cold winter day. The ground was covered in a thick layer of snow. The sky was clear. It was a perfect winter day. My sister and I arrived at my dad's place at around lunchtime. That afternoon, we were in the stables helping out with chores. I remember that in Stable 1, we had slaughtered pigs that were maybe a couple months old. Stable 2, we had pregnant sows that were expected to give birth any day. Stable number 3 was empty and had just been cleaned and prepared for a new delivery of pregnant sows to arrive within the next couple of days. I remember my sister being so bored this day because the only thing she liked to do was cuddle and play with the newborn piglets, of which we had none at this time. My dad was in the empty stable number 3 working on a broken gate to one of the pens that had been damaged when the slaughter pigs that were housed there earlier were moved. I had just fed the pigs in stable number 2 when my dad told me that he had found one of the slaughtered pigs injured. It was quite common for them to get injured when they were in the teenage stage of life, trying to establish dominance, and being very eager to be playful. But it was unusual for them to get seriously injured. Usually it was just smaller scratches or bite marks. When he told me that this pig probably had a broken front leg, my heart dropped because I knew there was nothing we could do. And the pig had to be put down to end its misery, and I hated that. It was not often it happened, but when it did, I always started to tear up. I helped my dad to find the injured pig, carried it out through the door to the back side of the building, Out on the backside, there was a big round manure tank, approximately 15 meters in diameter and several meters deep, partially buried in the ground, with just about a meter of top above ground level. We carried the pig to the other side of the tank, and my dad brought the butchery bolt gun, but I refused to stay out while my dad had to do what he did. I went back inside and continued to feed the pigs, listening to music, trying to get my mind off what just happened to that poor piglet. After a while, my dad came in to tell me he needed to go to his workshop and get some tools to fix the gate that he was working on, and he asked if I wanted to stay here or go with him. His workshop, where he stored and maintained his agricultural machines and equipment, was a 10-minute drive from the farm, and he said he'd be back in about a half hour or so, so I decided to stay. I helped him carry some tools to his car and watched him and my sister drive off. It was mid-afternoon, but it was already dark outside, and I was now alone on the farm. But I didn't mind that. We live just south of the Arctic Circle, and in winter, we only have a few hours of sunlight from late morning to early afternoon, so I was used to these short winter days and the darkness. The sky was still clear, but now covered with bright stars, and the moon looked bigger, brighter, and more beautiful than usual. I went back inside to the staff room to eat one of the sandwiches my dad had brought for us. After that, I went back and started clearing out more pens in stable 1 and 2. The stables had slotted floors that could be opened to scrape down the feces and straw, which was then automatically transported to an open manure tank in the backside. Because of the freezing temperature, I first had to go out on the back and start the circulation pump to keep the liquid manure from freezing in the pipes. I went out back and opened the hatch to the control panel and started the pump. I closed the hatch and looked across the manure tank at the baby pig lying there in the snow. A dim light shone through the windows from the lights inside, and from the moon lit the area up. The snow under the pig's head was now colored red, and I actually felt a bit relieved knowing that it was no longer in pain. I went back inside and started to clean out the pens, and after about an hour or a half hour I had finished the 2 stables, my dad and sister were not back yet from the workshop. So I decided to go in the staff room and have a Coke from the refrigerator and watch some TV until they came back. We still had some work to do, but I felt like I deserved a break, and they would probably be back in any minute. After just a few minutes of watching some boring reality TV show and drinking my Coke and having a second sandwich, I remembered I had left the circulation pump to the manure tank on in the back. I put down the sandwich and went out to the corridor toward the back room to turn it off. I opened the back door and stepped out, and was just about to open the hatch to the control panel when I saw something moving in the corner of my eye. Just across the manure tank, I looked towards it, and immediately my heart dropped and my entire body froze from fear. What I saw was something I had never seen before, and really hope that I never see it again. Over on the other side of the manure tank was a huge animal leaned over the carcass of the pig that my dad had left out there earlier. The animal was facing away from me, so I could only see its back. At first I thought it was a brown bear, but way bigger, and the tail was long with a lot of hair on it. The animal was covered in this dark gray and black fur, with a wide, muscular upper body, and I could see the steam from its breath rising in the cold air. Suddenly this animal stood on its hind legs, and this thing was huge. My guess, maybe 220 to 240 centimeters tall, or roughly 7 to 8 feet tall. It turned its head slightly to the right, nose towards the sky, and opened its mouth to toss a piece of meat down its throat. The head was definitely the head of a wolf, but much bigger and darker. It had long, furry ears pointed upwards and a long snout with large canine teeth. We have both wild wolves and bear living in this area, but this was something else, bigger, stronger, and it felt more evil. The creature leaned down over the pig carcass again to continue its feast. I realized it had not yet noticed me standing there outside the door behind it. I was so scared. I didn't know if I should scream, cry, or faint. My body was still frozen and wouldn't move. I finally found the strength to silently walk backwards inside and slowly close and lock the door. Even when inside, I tried to run through the corridor as quietly as possible and lock the front door as well. I didn't want to give that monster a chance to get inside. I walked back to the door to stable 2 that had windows facing the back side where this creature was. I looked into the stable through the window and the door. The windows on the wall were about 2 meters up from the floor, so I could see the steam from its breath rising in the outside air. Suddenly, some of the pigs saw me through the door window and started grunting loudly. Soon they were all grunting very loudly, as they always do when they see a person, excited and hoping that we had brought food. I looked back at the window just in time to see this creature stand up and turn toward the window and the sound of the pigs. I could only see the top of its head and its ears when it walked up to the window. I quickly sat down on the floor in front of the door, and now I silently started to cry. I started crawling on the floor back to the staff room to get to the phone and call my dad. Remember, this was 2000, and I was 12. I did not own a mobile phone at the time. I reached the door and realized that there were 2 big windows in the staff room that didn't have curtains or blinds. I didn't dare go inside, risking that the creature would turn up on the front side of the building and see me through those windows. I sat down in the corner between the door to the staff room and the front door, and now I couldn't hold it anymore. I started crying like never before. I was sure the monster would get inside, and if it did, it would hear me crying and find me. Suddenly, the door handle to the front door violently turned, and something tried pushing the door open. I screamed, and the handle turned again, followed by 2 loud thuds in an attempt to break the door open. Now I was sure I was going to die. I heard loud knocks on the door and my dad's voice calling for me. I rushed, unlocking and opening the door, telling my dad and sister to hurry inside and locking the door as they did. When I turned to my dad, he saw I was crying and asked what was wrong. I told him the whole story of what I called the werewolf, and he looked at me, not saying a word, then looked at my sister. He looks back at me and asks if I've done feeding and cleaning the pens, and I nodded. He nods back, thoughtfully looking down at the floor for a few seconds, and then back at us, telling us to rest, telling that the rest of the work can wait until morning, and walks us to the house. In the evening, he went by himself to give the pigs their evening meal. My sister and I watched him from the upper floor of the house as he walked across the yard, hoping that creature would not be hiding in the dark, ready to attack him. I remember him looking all around with a flashlight as he walked. When he came back, I asked him if he had seen the dead pig in the backside. He said he had, or what was left of it. He said it looked like some predator had found it and dragged the rest of it to the forest. After this incident, my dad was very clear that we were not allowed to go outside after dark. As I got older, I've been thinking a lot about that day and how my dad reacted after I told him what happened, followed by strict rules about never going outside after dark. Did my dad know this creature existed, lurking in the forest surrounding the farm? Has he seen it himself? My dad later passed away from leukemia some years later before I had a chance to ask him about it. But I am certain that he knew something about that creature that I saw that day. Today's second encounter. This experience is not mine personally, but was shared with me. The experience was told to me about 10 years ago, but the actual account happened long before the telling. I live in Vancouver Island, a small island located in the Pacific Ocean, just off the mainland of Canada, with just a stone's throw across the border from Washington State. My longtime girlfriend of the time was First Nations, having been raised on the far west coast of Vancouver Island here in British Columbia. We decided to take a small vacation and spend a relaxing weekend in the small coastal town of Tofino, found on the far west coast of the island. I have many stories about working, living, and strange encounters that I've experienced there, helping to fuel my natural curiosity towards the area, but this one has always stuck with me. At the end of the vacation, we were heading back to our home on the eastern side, and while we were driving through Cathedral Grove, one of the old growth forests left on the island, my girlfriend suggested that we stop into the major town of Port Alberni while passing through. She wanted to stop and see her uncle's family, who she hadn't seen in years since they had all moved from the coastal village inland. I agreed, and after another hour worth of driving in the darkness, by 8 p.m. we found ourselves parked just outside the humble home, just on the outskirts of this small port town. I had never met these relatives before, but on the trip there, my girlfriend had proceeded to give me a rundown on her uncle and aunt. After much conversation, it had come to my attention that her uncle was the blood hereditary chieftain of the tiny village in which she was raised in. We walked into a rustic kitchen, which could be entered from the back door of the house, to see her Aunt Kathy quaintly baking cookies. She had already removed them from the oven, placed them on a cooling rack, and began introducing herself while ushering us to sit down at the dinner table. After a brief introduction, we had come to discover that none of my girlfriend's cousins were home at the time, being away for a basketball tournament, leaving only her and Arthur there. After some talking between the two, Kathy stood up and loaded a handful of cookies onto a small plate. With an inviting smile while placing the plate into my hands, she asked if I could take the plate of cookies down the hall to the living room where Arthur was watching TV. The two women began discussing about local community powwow and turned their attention from me, and that was my cue to exit. I clutched the circular plate of cookies and walked down the extended dark hallway that led to a large living room that could be entered from the home's front door. Nervously, I tightly gripped that plate of cookies and proceeded to casually enter the living space. There, on the far side of the room, sat her Uncle Arthur, very silent, stoic, watching the news on TV from his dark brown lounge chair. He possessed strong features and tired eyes on a hardened exterior. A man who had not only seen many things, but have lived them as well. I came quietly into the room, setting the plate of cookies onto the barrelwood table that sat between his lounge chair and the couch, and proceeded to introduce myself to him. He asked if I would mind taking a seat at the end of the couch next to him so we could talk. I agreed and sat on the couch seat directly next to the large lounger. He began asking me questions about myself as well as where we had just come from on our vacation to stop by his house, to which I explained we wanted to take a small vacation on the coast of the island for a while to see the village where my girlfriend had grown up. We proceeded to have a wonderful discussion covering many topics associated with the small village where he had been chief for many years. Insightful discussions about raising kids, the local wildlife area, and much more. He seemed to relish the chance to share much of the small village's quiet history with me, and the time in which the family had resided there. Time passed quickly in enjoyment, until after a particular conversation we were having about a mountain trail which we hiked when we were at the village a few days prior. Arthur quickly became silent as his look of enjoyment in the conversation changed into one of stoic silence, like the one he possessed when I first walked in. I was completely puzzled by the quick 180-degree turn in his attitude, wondering if I had said something that offended him. He then raised the television remote up from the TV and switched it off. The sound of the crackling fire was the only sound left, At this point, I was stumped as what had just occurred to cause this silent tension. As he leaned forward in his chair, rubbing his strong chin, his eyes returned to mine, where he sternly asked, "Did she take you up the forest trail, the one that goes to the Red Rock?" He was referring to an area close to the village along the river, where a monstrous red stone boulder extended off the top of a small cliff, overlooking the flowing river that the children used to play on hot summer months. I thought through my memories, and I was correct that we had indeed hiked that exact trail. The heavily forested terrain up to the stone in question. Arthur shook his head in a slow, anticipating motion as he let out a deep sigh, pausing for a moment. And then he leaned forward close to me. "Do you plan on going there again?" he boldly asked. I was unsure how to answer, as I wasn't sure of the concept of the question or tone in which the conversation had quickly flipped into. I proceeded to tell him that I indeed had planned to come back for a similar vacation, as the surfing and fishing are great in that part, plus the nostalgia alone for my girlfriend returning to the village of her childhood would make the trip worth it. He took a moment of silence before beginning to speak once more. "I can tell your heart is true. You respect the earth, and that you are good for my niece. I want you to be extremely careful when going into the mountains by way of the river, especially at night," he continued as he sat back in his chair. He removed his armed forces ball cap from his head, giving the thinning hair on his scalp a jostle. At this point, I was stone silent, completely stunned towards what he had just said to me, or as to what could possibly follow his last remark. "It was my duty as chief to give you my blessing in returning to the trail, to walk in freely without harm, and to allow you safe passage from the Sussex. If you have respect for them and their home, they will mean you no harm." I was completely hooked on every word and found myself needing more clearer answers, asking him what exactly a Sussex was. Arthur then explained to me that in rough translation of his language, the Sussex meant wild man in his native tongue. He said that there was a small group of humanoid creatures that stood bipedally, with large feet standing around 7 to 9 feet tall, covered from head to foot in almost entire hair. I personally better knew them by name of Sasquatch. Chieftains throughout history of that tribe would pass that experience down throughout the tribe, speaking about the existence of these forest protectors. They were covered in a thick mat of brown or sandy-colored fur, depending on the age and gender of the creature, that would act like a camouflage against the thick forest, allowing them to pass unseen, even right in front of the naked eye. They would leave tracks so large frogs can seek shelter in rain puddles found within them after rain. Arthur sat ahead in his chair, looked at me with a very serious, and then asked, "Do you believe in what I just told you?" I didn't believe in any of it myself. That was when I was a kid and my granddad and his dad used to tell stories. I accepted it as fact because the culture back in the day. I did leave questioning in myself to some capacity about its existence. That was until one October night when I went up to that same mountain trail to Red Rock, following the river to catch the migrating salmon during the autumn spawning run. He explained that on one night of spearfishing, he had taken the river trail much further than the Red Rock. The moon was full, making night fishing and following the path further into the dark woods much easier as I walked further in. I followed the river until I finally stopped when the river reaches a 120-degree bend, causing the speed of water to rapidly change through the rocks To a much slower pace, I proceeded to fish into the night, catching enough fish for my family and the neighbors. I've always loved spearfishing, standing on a thigh-high current flowing past me and reflecting on my own personal journey. It was around 2 in the morning when he noticed an eerie hush fall across the mountains like he had never experienced before, saying it was as if the entire mountain and forest was holding its breath with him waist deep in the water. Then something caught his eye, drawing his attention to the heavy woods that stood the higher elevated plateau to my northwest, approximately 30 yards away. I could see reflected eye shine of a bright yellow-greenish eyes coming from the darkness of the grove, staring directly at me, not moving a single muscle, after rustling large cedar branches. Had it not been for the large moon that was out that night and a couple of hours of developed night vision, I would have never even known it was there. I stood in the river with my body colder than the water itself as I began to steady holding my own breath while lowering my fishing spear in my hand toward my waist. I continued to watch as I began to focus on the details of this figure that stood hidden in the shadows. I could tell the figure was staring directly at me with a soft greenish eyes, allowing the true focus of the creature to be known. I could feel the unnerving sensation the animal had projected towards me, as if it just stared into my eyes, until I fully lowered the spear into a moving current and lowered my entire body down into the river. I stayed in that cold water, watching the figure move in my direction along the raised plateau. As I could see more of it as it came within 20 yards of me, never making a sound as it moved, I could tell it was a Cessic. Just like my father and grandfather had told me about, standing now about 15 yards away, bended into a row of large cedars that lined the riverbank. It stood 9 to 10 feet tall and could easily missed among the trunks of the further trees in the darkened texture of its fur as I stared in disbelief with my entire body shaking in the moving river. Looking back on the incident, I am sure it had been near this spot, being the area that bears would normally hunt for salmon during the day with the slowing of the current. I remained still for what seemed like hours in this cold river as I watched the large beast constantly scan up and down the river, trying to locate my presence, all the while cautiously creeping forward, my body shaking and becoming increasingly cold as I was witnessing the truth in words my forefathers spoke with this creature just above me that night, cementing my elders' words deeply within me. In time when I questioned my culture the most, the wind began to blow a strong breeze from the tidal current that proceeded to carry my scent, causing this creature to quickly turn away from me and disappear into the darkness of the heavy tree cover. I quickly stood up, clutching my spear so tightly in my hand, which I was sure I was close to hypothermia at that point, but using the time I had left to fish on the riverbank as an offering, and quickly hurried back toward the village. That is when the howling began, blood-curdling screams that still haunt me this day, echoing through the hills from another creature that I had failed to even see. I trekked as fast as I could down that river path and never went back that way ever since, for any reason. I was left speechless when Arthur had finished. No words to the man that wore the seriousness of the story boldly on his face. He proceeded to break the silence by continuing, "The Cessic is out there, unseen, always watching. So be careful going out there and proceed with only love in your heart for Mother Nature. Respect the forest with its guardians and you will be granted safety. Don't take this story lightly. The Sessek is out there watching everything, and if you are in its home, you are the same as any other creature abiding to the laws of nature. Suddenly, a heavy knock frightened me as I quickly flipped my head in the doorway beside me to see my girlfriend and her aunt. "Arthur, are you bothering our guest?" Kathy asked with her arms crossed and a smile on her face as my girlfriend stood behind her, explaining it was time to get back on the road. Arthur answered no and flicked the TV back on. Standing up, I extended my hand out to say goodbye, thanking my host for his time, food, and words. Arthur stood up, pulling me in for a hug instead, and patted me on the back. He spoke into my ear, which will stay with me for as long as I live. He simply said, "Never forget they are out there, always watching." I thanked the Aunt Kathy for a lovely visit to the couple's home, proceeded to say goodbye, and headed home. Since that day, I have met countless others within the various tribal community, which are located up and down the island through many events, all of which have their fair number of locals that have shared many stories with the population of Sasquatch that call our island forests home. After many years with my now fiance, I have seen, heard, and been part of countless Sasquatch experiences, adding my own voice to many who have had the luck, experience, and spirituality to come across these forest guardians. Thank you for hearing the truth. May you all find what it is that you seek, and remember that the Sasquatch is real. All right, folks, I hope you all enjoyed this bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what gives people a chance to share their experiences and theories judgment-free. Thank you. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, friends. These creatures are real. They're out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.